So I know I said it was going to be a while before I do another series, but then my job doesn't start until the 11th and I have all this excess energy. And then the Hormuz news is coming out. So everyone's talking about how the global food system is breaking and we're going to be in a famine in 3 months. And I figure, well, here's a bunch of guys talking, and shouldn't we have a girl on the scene? Plus, I feel like I could add some things to it that they're not saying. Therefore, I'm bringing you an all new 4-part series. I debated what to call this. I feel like there's a trade off between creativity and clarity. And plus, I feel like when you're talking about starvation, there's a risk of being a little bit unnecessarily offensive, and I can be that way, and I tried to reel that in. So we're just going to go with the end of abundance. And this episode is zooming out for perspective. You guys know I like to provide a lot of background information for things before we get into the specifics of what is now threatening modern food systems. And so here we're going to look at some of the, again, like that background action and longer term trends and trajectories that we've been on and are going to find ourselves on. I should start with this episode about who is we exactly, because if I'm asking the question, are we starving yet, that would imply that we currently aren't, when in fact, in the system that civilization has created, there are plenty of humans as well as other species who are and have been for a long time already without food. So for some preliminary context here, we have from Our World in Data, and normally I wouldn't trust them. I'm always a little bit skeptical of them because Hannah Ritchie is my arch nemesis, but this is coming straight from the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN, so I think it's pretty legit. And specifically, we're graphing people who are undernourished, meaning that they lack energy to maintain a normal, active, and healthy life. I have to assume that it is only looking at people on the very end extreme case of hunger because the number is only 8%, which seems low. So clearly we're using like a very strict parameter. And you'll notice that for a while it was coming down. We were making progress, development was occurring, and then around 2016 it starts to tick up. In his book Breaking Together, Jem Bendell references that as evidence that the world was actually already starting to go over the edge before COVID, because people blame the lockdowns for a lot of the economic disruption that people were experiencing, when in fact his point is that there was something triggering it and starting to crumble in a sense even before that. However, interestingly, we also see that the hunger rate was then starting to kind of recover, as in things were getting better in recent years. I assume that if we had more updated data past 2024, you would probably see it rising again. And then also in terms of children, 1 in 5 children, or a little bit more, under the age of 5 are stunted because of a caloric deficit. Then for some anecdotal evidence, here on the left we have a photo from Nigeria. That's a cattle herder, and these guys have been in conflict with the more sedentary farmers there for a while now. In the past 2 or so years, according to BBC, over 1,000 people have been killed in conflicts between these two groups. The BBC says that between rapid population growth in these areas further intensifies the competition for limited land and water, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of environmental stress, migration, and conflict escalation. And then on top of that, because of the climate change, there's more intermittent rainfall, which is leading to desertification. And the UN's World Food Program predicts, this is an article just from last year, but they figured that in this year, there'll probably be nearly 35 million people who will face severe food insecurity, including famine-like conditions. I don't know the difference between famine-like conditions and an actual famine, but going back to my previous slide where I felt like the 8% seemed like a low percentage compared to what my impression is of the situation, actually now come to think of it, because of the math, when you have over 8 billion humans, even 8% of 8 billion is still a very, very high number. So there are at least tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of humans, even with it just being 8%, who are starving. And then down here we have this photo from Sudan. Their war is also driving people to starvation, and people have resorted to eating, quote, weeds and plants. And there in the photo you have a woman looking at the photographer as if to say, how do you guys not even know that weeds and plants are the same thing? And here we have the situation in the world's greatest nation, the United States of America. 13.7% of households are food insecure, and they distinguish here between low security and very low security. And what makes the difference is whether or not you were able to leverage some type of strategy to avoid substantially disrupting your eating patterns or reducing your food intake. And what those workarounds might look like is either altering your diet to be less varied, accessing SNAP benefits, or visiting a food pantry. I also wonder, and I made a little note to self, is like I'm aware of the fact that people are buying a lot of their groceries on credit, that there's like types of like Shopify programs like that or whatever now, which I feel like should also count. And probably if we counted that, the slice would be a little bit bigger. Moving on from just the one species of Homo sapiens onto the others with whom we share this planet, although we're not particularly good at it. This is a depiction of all of the mammal mass on Earth, whether that is on land or in the sea, which is the bottom right has the little icons to represent whales and dolphins. You can think that the amount of mass that is making up any particular species or group of them is a direct reflection of how many food molecules they've been able to consume. Because my body, the material that makes it up, comes from what I eat and breathe. And earlier it came from what my mom ate. But anyway, if you're not eating, you can't be made up of anything, or can't be replenishing those cells. So if you see those humans making up such a large chunk of all of the mammals that exist on this planet, that means that we have been accessing, claiming a ton of the Earth's available calories, whereas the fact that certain animal groups, like wild animals, have so little to speak for at this point is the direct consequence of the fact that they've been cut off from their food supply. And I don't have it in this presentation, but it's in a couple of my other Substack posts. There've been studies that it is definitely primarily agriculture that has been driving the mass extinction which we are currently in, not climate change. It hasn't come on as like a major factor yet. Of course, it will in the future, but so far, what you're seeing here, that is the effect of agriculture. And then this chart on the bottom was a new find for me. It is basically taking those two squares that are representative of wild land mammals, so they're the two elephants there on the first one, and expanding it into more detail so you can imagine all of the land-based mammals who are still wild, but their numbers are dwindling. So there's the breakdown. Carnivores are only 3%, so they're actually 3% of 2% of all of the mammalian mass, which is tiny. And yeah, it doesn't look good for them, but it also doesn't look good for us, because when one or two species takes over an entire planet, that doesn't end well for anyone. Actually, I want to harp on this point a little bit longer. So, agriculture as extermination strategy to wipe out every other species except for your own. So when we look at a field like this of crops, we think, oh, how nice, nature, because we're so accustomed to living in a really built up environment like a city or a suburb that in contrast, that does look super green and everything. But the difference between that and any other kind of habitat is that a regular habitat would be able to provide food and shelter to a variety of different species. So I've tried to depict that here by showing a bunch of different colored dots. And so that could be a forest, a savanna, a meadow, whatever. Whereas when humans come in and start to farm, often what they do is they section it off and then they convert the whole area to food that is just for them. And the best that we do, and we're like trying our hardest to be environmentally friendly, is you might plant some pollinator flowers or whatever to support them and encourage that, because we've decided that that's a cause that we're willing to get behind. But like, that's just the insects. There's still, as we saw in the previous chart, a whole bunch of other herbivores in the animal kingdom who we prevent from finding food in those areas by claiming it for ourselves. And it doesn't seem like much when you have one human claiming 1 acre, but then they start to reproduce and suddenly you're claiming more and more acres until there are 8 billion of you pushing and squeezing out all the other species. And Tom Murphy did some math and looked at the rate at which the human population was rising after the advent of agriculture in the Neolithic Revolution. And he found that starting around 10,000 BC, so this is before city-states and definitely before fossil fuels, the human population, just with the added advantage of agriculture, was already rising at 0.042%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at that rate, we would have reached our current population of 8 billion plus by the year 8,800, which also sounds far away, but on a geological time scale, that's not actually much longer than it took us with all the extra perks that we've accessed. So we, even if we hadn't found fossil fuels, and even if we hadn't even gotten around to forming city-states, simply the act of farming and spreading with that at the rate that we already were observing, as has been documented, or I guess discerned from fossil records or whatever, we would have gotten to this point of overwhelming the planet. Just one more slide on this topic, I swear. So what I had shown you already with the graphs was a current snapshot of things, but like if you're familiar with financial statements, right, you get a sense of your stocks, but then you want to see your flows. And so this is showing over time the trend, and you can see that the massive land mammals has been just nosediving and experiencing exponential decay, while the human population has been experiencing exponential growth. And those two things are related because our species has been starving all the other species out of existence. Moving on to the second part of this episode, it feels like nowadays a lot more people are talking about collapse or using that word, but often they use it in reference to qualitative decline, like the fact that America is kind of going down the drain and we're losing our rights and stuff. But what the prospect of famine brings up is that collapse very much also implies quantitative decline. Here I'm providing some examples of what I mean when I complain that people on voices in the collapse space are overemphasizing qualitative decline. We have the term enshittification, which is kind of like a buzzword now. Someone came through the college town that I'm in, actually Cory Doctorow, to give a book talk on his thing, and so it's a popular term and concept. And then you also have Nate Hagen's, lesser known, but still with a significant following, using this concept of the great simplification, which on the one hand spreads the news about an important piece of information, which is that I think a lot of people are operating on the impression that as we move into the future, that life will get more and more advanced and convenient and comfortable and all that, when in reality, what we're going to start to see now is development reversing. And that's really great that he's promoting that message, but at the same time, it kind of lies by omission because you're skipping out on the part where we're likely to see a die-off of humans, a major drop in our numbers over a short period of time, which seems like something worth mentioning. Now, what we have here is easily one of my top 5 favorite graphs. But before I get into that, let me first recap the point that I was trying to make in the first half of this video, which is that even though we're talking about the fact that, oh my God, famine is coming, casual reminder, of course, that ever since humans started practicing agriculture 12,000 years ago, we've been driving other species to starvation by seizing land from them and causing a mass extinction. And also, because of civilization and the way that they are structured, there's always a portion of even the human species that is at the bottom rung and scraping by. So famine is a new thing on the horizon for some of us, but it's been there for a long time for other beings. Now, point number 2, which kind of helps me lead into what I'm going to talk about here, is that another reminder, just to give you some perspective, is that every living thing on the earth was eventually going to die. Every time you have a kid, you should know they're going to die one day. Like you, by bringing them into existence, you guarantee that they are also going to go out of existence at some point. The question, though, is, of course, the when and how of all of that. And so, of course, when you cram a bunch of deaths into a short period of time, that's when it looks like an extinction event or a major die-off. And so it feels a little silly whenever we say, oh my God, we're all going to die. Well, of course we were. We always were. What we mean is that we're all going to, most of us, let's say, are going to die within a certain short time period now. And so that brings me to the limits to growth. This is not a scenario, but like a model that's run, and they've been doing it a simulation is the word, ever since 1972. And the results that it kept spitting out, no matter what you tweak, is that it is the way that they put it is you can't have growth, infinite growth on a finite planet. The way that I would also interpret it is that there was absolutely no way for us, for humans, to hold on to even complex civilization. Like I said in the previous slide, that agriculture, even at the modest rate that we were expanding, was eventually going to lead to this. So we were always going to rise and fall, peak and then crash, grow and hit a wall. Like it always just, it gets, oh, it goes overboard and then it all just implodes. That was the pattern that was kind of, if you pursue one type of strategy, that's what it leads to. It was bound to do that. And so it was never going to be possible to keep the human population as high as it currently is. And so if you can't keep it high, that leads to one option, which is for it to be much lower in the future. And of course, I do think that we should be lowering the birth rate. Don't have kids. I'm not having kids. But at this point, I don't think that's going to be enough to uh, bring the population down at a rate that the Earth's ability to support our population is going to be falling. So even if everyone stopped having kids tomorrow, which would be a favor to them because they weren't going to survive what's coming anyway, you would still see a lot of the humans who already exist dying off because of how rapidly the conditions are going to become inhospitable to us. But enough of that, let's get into the chart. So the first of all, ignore the dotted lines because that is kind of meant to show you the earlier calculations that the simulator had made. We want to focus on the solids. So pink is resources running out. Solid blue is pollution increasing. Then go on to food production. So the solid green is food production. That's what we're here to talk about. And if you look at that, in 2023, the model was predicting that it was actually going to start to drop before 2025. So, these things aren't perfect. We can't even get a weather report accurate these days, but the way that I take it is like, give or take around 2025 is when we were going to see a drop off anyway. So if this war hadn't occurred, then it would have just been something else. The system was already so depleted, degraded, it was crumbling anyway. Something was going to take it out and reduce our food supply. So there we see the food supply dropping, and also industrial activity. That's another thing that we're becoming aware of now, thanks to the Hormuz blockade, is that you need fossil fuels to manufacture things and just to keep that kind of economy of modern, digital, all kinds of technology going. So that is the solid red line that also peaks and begins to fall before 2025. So like if you have my mindset, the way that I move about the world, it's like I was just expecting this to happen anyway. So everyone else is shocked, but I was like, well, if it wasn't this, it would have just been something else. We were on the brink. And then finally, the solid orange line is your population. And you can see there again, 2025 is when it kind of plateaus out and definitely starts to fall before 2050. So that was the forecast that was made in 2023. I would love to see a version of this that's updated with the latest real data. Because I'd be curious to see whether it actually does, how well it reflects what's actually been going down in the last few years, if things managed to climb a little bit longer. But anyway, yep, we were on this road even if Hormuz hadn't happened. And I'd like to close by talking about the sheer magnitude of death that's on the horizon. Human deaths, because we've already wiped out all the other species and hardly even noticed, so it's our turn. And, we usually think about certain events within recent human history as being major tragedies involving a lot of deaths. But if we're talking about their impact on population dynamics, the last time that the human population fell at all was during the Black Plague of the 1300s. Ever since then, the population has been climbing. So during the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic, pandemic, whatever. Also World War II and the Holocaust and the Holodomor and all that kind of stuff, as well as 9/11 and COVID. There were bodies piling up in Central Park. Like that seemed like a pretty massive scale death rate tragedy kind of situation. And yet it didn't even create a little divot in the human population. Our population has continued to skyrocket. And so my point is that when we're talking about the number of deaths that is sufficient to actually flatten the curve of our population or make it go down as the simulation, the model, whatever shows is coming up, that is going to be such a deadly event that it's going to far surpass anything that we've experienced or that our parents or grandparents have, in terms of, like, we don't even know what it's like to walk around in a world where the population is falling. I guess you can kind of experience it if you go to one of the countries where they're experiencing the population falling. So I think that that's Japan already, and maybe France. I saw the birth rate is starting to fall below the replacement rate, but like immigration is still happening like that and everything. And I think this is just going to be so much worse, and of course, global. So I'll end on that note and have more focus on current events and agriculture in the next few videos.